Thanks for joining another episode of Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. I'm your host, Josh Dietrich, and today, physically here in the house, one of my best buddies, Mr. Matt Eklund. How are you, sir?
Doing great, brother.
I know you are, because we've had a little preliminary, jump start to the morning here. But what we want to just first say is we, as in me, as in this podcast has been such a great place to sit down with dudes and create a safe environment to just talk. Yeah. Like, how often does it happen? I can't recall, besides sitting in this chair without a microphone ever, besides a counseling room, that I can process life with the dude. So I want to first say thanks for being here, dude. I know, just knowing your story and knowing you, that the journey you've been on has been real. It's been very real. And so, first of all, Successfully Unsuccessful, for everyone to understand, to me, and why you're here, is that you are a man that I've gotten to know over a few years from a bike ride, doing 100 miles multiple times. You are a pretty amazing handyman, but from seeing the standpoint of how businesses can take construction and take them from a zero to a massively large project and be the guy to ensure things are on time and on budget at a large scale. I think that's incredible, because I've never managed projects that size. So from my standpoint, you have a lot on me, and that's awesome. So you do that professionally. That's great. But what's cool about the story and having you here is that 6 years of getting to know Jesus, right? And let's just say until the last maybe 6 months. What was the most recent? And I'm not trying to lead everyone into the story, but sure, at the same time, the background is the journey's been real to uncover the old Matt, where he comes from, the Matt that he's kind of right now, and the Matt that he wants to be. And that 6-year journey goes back to a period of time where, had you not got up with your family and gone to church that morning, we're not really sure where Matt might have ended up, right? So 100%. I think we're going right in, guns a-blazing, starting there. Walk us through that morning and why that was so ridiculously important for you and your family.
Yeah. So it's been a journey, and I don't think there's like a when did it flip?
Right.
Like it's a constant work, right? And so the night before the morning you're talking about was a dark, angry, it was a knockdown, drag-out argument with my wife and I, where I climbed into a bottle of whiskey and found myself on the couch, and we had been not in a good place for a while. I think at this point we'd moved to St. Michael's, so we'd been married probably 3-ish years. And my wife and I have a long, winding story that goes back to when we were freshmen in high school. So we started dating when we were 15, and we can get into that. But so straight into the faith journey, that next morning, wake up, headache, foggy, right, hungover, and my wife had been telling us for a while, like, we need to find a church and go to a church. And I was like, I ain't freaking going.
And that's how it's been the whole time. It's like, I ain't going.
Yeah, and so I grew up kind of I grew up in a broken home, and so the idea of the Catholic Church and a Lutheran church and faith it wasn't new to me, but I was very opposed to it, and for many different things and reasons that happened in my youth. But that morning I woke up and I just felt like, you know what? At some point I will end up going to this church with my wife and kids, and I sure don't want people to look at me as like, oh, there's the absent father that let his wife and kids go to church for God knows how long, right? And so
by themselves, without me, right?
Right. And so it's about me at this point. It's about my reputation. It's about the perception of our family. But I got up, and they were like within 10 minutes of walking out the door, and I like threw some clothes on, and I was like, fine, I'll go, right? Surely there's profanity laden with this experience too. I remember riding to Westbridge, like I was in the passenger seat because I probably
driving still.
Yeah, was certainly probably not able to drive, or at least legally.
Yeah.
So I remember like facing the window and like we didn't talk. We went in and it was just kind of like, it was a new place, right? And so that was like, that started off the movement. And I can't say if it was that morning, but over the next kind of year or two, we kind of started slow, right? Once a month and then every other week. And then it slowly grew into like serving opportunities, right? We're being called to be a part of the church. Like God wants more for you. He doesn't want things from you. And starting to prescribe to that idea. And so it just kind of slowly grew over time and still being broken, man. Like, so yeah, it's just growing, right? It's a slow growth. It's a reluctant obedience. It's being halfways in. And for the next year and a half, it was probably a year and a half in, I jumped in to serve with kids. And found, I had a third grader and a kindergartner at the time. So like, okay, let's go serve at a service and then attend a service. And then that transitioned into joining the worship team. I grew up singing, loved to sing. And what I've come to learn is that's where I find God, and God speaks to me and I connect with him and I feel the Holy Spirit through song. And so I joined the worship team. And it's just been like, it's a slow growth, man. And there's never been like the aha, like, oh, God fixed me. God changed our family. Like God, like we're better now.
Right.
Like, no,
right.
We're in process still. Right.
In fact, there's probably still more to come that hurts before it's healed.
Oh, no question in my mind.
And that's kind of where I started, right here in the thick of this. Because at the age of 6 years ago, you would have been
29.
29. I was going to say 30. 29, right? Married for 3 years. And at this point, you mentioned, so your kids. And so let's go backwards now into the season of meeting your high school sweetheart in high school, eventually getting married, but not through all of that. And then we go back to even before that, growing up in Buffalo, Minnesota, right? So let's just say this. We go from first time at church, there's an awareness of this place is probably better for me than and it's helping me and understand a little bit more about this guy I never knew. And, I'm buying into serving and I'm learning and I'm growing in him and, maybe not fully surrendered because I don't know what that even means yet. Right.
100%.
Right. And I'm still learning myself. Right. And so, but you've been reflecting and you've been experiencing still brokenness as a believer. Right. And so what would you say in the thick of the 6 years really started helping you realize that there is some stuff from your past, from your marriage, from meeting your wife, from your childhood that you still maybe hadn't dealt with? Because we're talking about you and I connecting maybe 40 years later, first time riding a bike, the second time maybe serving on a Sunday together as a drummer. I think it says, in Jesus' name I play.
I like that.
It's from my wife. But there's this bridge, right? And so it's like, okay, this is our baseline faith. And then we go, ooh, there's still a lot in here, God. What do I got to do with all this? So help me bridge the gap now with marriage and then back to childhood, what you began to process and where some of the things from your past really were starting to challenge your faith. And you either have to submit to the challenge and keep doing, or eventually find a way to squash it, right? You have to get serious about that. What happened and when was that?
That's 6 months. It was when we moved and all of the life stress that came with that. Actually, it's probably even been less than that. I think it's probably been 3 months.
So we're going back to earlier this year. Okay, but so then let's just say 0. So on the spiritual awareness chart, okay?
Yeah.
-10 is like no God.
Yeah.
whatever. And then you move closer to -8, -7, awareness maybe of something or someone that has, living a different life, right? And then curiosity. So you get up closer to 0. It's like, okay, I believe there's a God. I believe that he sent his son Jesus to save me.
Yeah.
Now we're at 0. That's 6 years ago. Now we're building.
I think 0 for me has been like I grew up in the church, and so like.
So you had been at 0 in your mind?
I think in my mind, 6 years ago I'm at 0, right? Like, yes, I believe there's a God. I believe there's more to our existence than just physical here forever, right? And so through college, I probably went to like -5, -6.
A season of questioning.
But like 6 years ago, I'm like, yeah, I believe God's a thing.
Yeah, got it. So now your baseline, and your baseline's growing, right? You're starting to maybe dive in, being part of small group, learning, starting to consume spiritual food. Okay. What happens when you say, I'm at a point where I have to decide to do something different?
Yeah.
So we go back 6 months, 5 months ago now in 2024, right? And walk us through what your reality is and what happened and what had to change.
Sam and I had another knockdown, drag-out argument in February. And I now can recognize I was attacked by the enemy, the one who's been attacking me my whole life. And I found myself standing on a frozen pond within feet of open water, jumping up and down, going, I am done with it.
At the new property.
At the new house, walked onto the neighbor's property far enough to where my wife and kids couldn't find me if something happened. And I'm standing there jumping on the pond going, I'm at the end of it. I don't know where we can go from here. Is there a way up from here? Like, where do I go from here? So I'm jumping, right? And ice doesn't break. And there's open water right there, man. Like, I can see the beaver dam on our property. I can see the running water. It's probably 11 o'clock, midnight, maybe later. And so ice doesn't break. And I fell to my knees and I sat out there and I talked to God for a while. But like angrily, right? Like I'm still like tore up inside, but like I remember sitting there like, God, if it's your will, like fine, don't let the ice break. But man, my will sure as hell wants to go in
and not come back up.
And I remember standing there like, fine, maybe I should just dive into this thing. And it was that moment. I spent, I don't know, a couple hours out there by myself, laid on the ice, praying, talking, staring at the stars, hearing wildlife move around me, like wondering if the werewolf is coming, right? Because we're in the middle of nowhere. And like there's coyotes chirping, like there's a real like, man, whatever, God, like if it's your will or the will of the enemy, like let it be. And I don't know how I got to it, but I do know how I get to it. It's my kids. It's the idea that, like, holy smokes, man. And I've learned over my life that, like, the act of taking your own life, like, that's like the pinnacle of selfishness is kind of what I've heard it. It's also a disease. And so for anyone that hears it, that's like struggling through that, like, it's a disease at the same time. And so I don't want to like
diminish or downplay, but
downplay it that like, but like, I'm like, oh man. So I'm thinking of my kids, right? I'm thinking of them growing up without a dad. And that's where I pick myself up and trudge my way back through the cattails for I don't know, however many hundreds of yards.
You started walking through your kids, right? Kind of like How would they feel if I was gone? Where would they be? And I recall as we dived into this, just this amazing weekend, we'll talk about in a bit, but you were unpacking what life would be like for them and justifying whether or not it would matter. Like walking through each of your children. Share more about that, would you?
Well,
like,
I think the
tracking, you know what I'm saying.
The perspective of me is I've spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship that I've had with my parents and the things that have happened through my youth and growing up in a broken home and losing family members at a very young age. Like, that's made me into the person I am today and make me do the things I do, or maybe not make me, but it's the reason why. Mm-hmm. And so honestly, for me, it was like the perspective of like, whoa, like what sort of adult do my kids become if they grow up without a dad? Or what sort of relationship with herself does my wife have if I take my own life? Like, what does that mean for her? And then, like, God would have it, or life would have it, that inevitably there's another man that comes into their life. But, like, I have no control over any of that if I'm not here. And quite frankly, I don't have control over it if I surrender it to God. Mm. And so it was that thought process of like, okay, my oldest son, like, what does that look like? Well, okay, Liam's my stepson. He has a dad. And I've recently come to the terms that, like, I've been trying to be his dad. He has a wonderful dad who God put in his life intentionally. So he doesn't need me to be his dad. He needs me to be a brother in Christ. And that I learned at Wild at Heart. Good. Yeah. And then my daughter, like, what sort of men will she pursue in her life when the model of a man that was her dad couldn't take it? And then I think about my son Maverick, and like, he's 6, man. You lose your dad when you're 6 because he like right? Like, so his dad, no. I can't imagine the man that he would be someday reflecting on where his dad was, right? And then Ezra, how innocent is he? He's 3, man. Like, he would never remember me. Mm-hmm. Like, his dad never existed. Mm-hmm. I'm like, thank you, God. This is what it's about. Mm. And it wasn't a week later, I get the Dad Awesome podcast. I get introduced to Jeremy Morris through the Wild Courage podcast. I start listening to dudes sharing their story of brokenness. And it's like, son of a... Now this is what it's all about, man. Like, I can get through all of that crap. And I don't have to think these things anymore. But then that's when the work started, man. That's when I reached out to you. And I'm like, hey, dude, you've shared with me your journey and your commitment to professional help and these things. I've been reluctant. Granted, my parents put me in counseling as I was growing up constantly because I was acting out because of all of the crap that went on.
You went to counseling?
I did as a kid.
They couldn't even get me to go.
Yeah, really?
My dad wouldn't enforce my mom, and there's some of that resentment towards my dad. Like, my mom was the disciplinary, and she just couldn't get me.
Yeah.
So when you reached out, you said, hey.
It's like, I need a resource, man. And it was, again, on the heels of an outburst of the monster within me, and my wife looked at me, and she didn't say the words, like you either figure this out or we're gone. Mm-hmm. But I knew that was the tone when she said, you need to get some help.
And this time it was probably serious, because if you're like me or even other men and women in marriages, the D word can float around more than we would like it to.
All the time. That's been a regular thing in our marriage when things get tough.
It's been, when you get to that point, it's scary. And so it's a threat, it's a wake-up call, it's a shock, but nothing like on the ice jumping up and down. And I would say even furthermore, this wasn't just a random one time walking out there. What I remember and recall in our conversations, that for months, for seasons, it was conversations with yourself about even the ice being one of the options, not the end all be all, but just one of the options that could do it, that might actually look like, well, maybe not exactly an accident, but in the construct of our brains, there's a layers of he's gonna, someone's talking about suicide, right? Well, the next first thing you're supposed to ask them is, have you considered how to do it? And when they start specifically answering those questions, there's potentially a real threat. So as you were sharing this with me the first time, I said, well, okay, but have you considered how suicide would look for you? And I think your answer was what? Something like, oh yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So what would you share with that? Because I want to highlight something. It's more about not the fact that you were on the ice, and that's extreme, but I think what shocked me more is getting there, because there had been prior thoughts, right? How many, how often, what was that like, and why do you feel like that was happening? Why do you feel like the chore of life was that hard? Like, help us understand. And I say us, because it's so easy sometimes to forget about all the blessings and how grateful and the gratitude we should be practicing. Yeah. And we go to selfishness, and that's what drives my anger, right? But for you to be at that place where that ice instance wasn't the first time you thought about this. How many times before and how often?
I can think of very distinctly. Well, the why. Let's start with the why. So the why is a sense of worthlessness, a sense of I'm not enough, a sense that I'm the problem, and that if I can remove the problem, which I've learned in my career, right? Like
problem solving,
solve the problem, and then we have a solution. Well, if I'm the problem, I know how to solve that. Let's remove the problem. I thought I knew how to solve that. Removal of the problem is not the solution to what's going on here. And so I've recently, again, through my experience of the last 3 months and a lot of soul searching and going to therapy and attending the Wild at Heart boot camp, like, there's work going in to realize that, like, well, wait a second here. Like, I am not the problem. There are problems that live within me that need some repair, but that is not inherently given to me from God. Like, I am not the problem.
And even if you were the problem, there's a perspective in addition to that that say it's not your fault, right? Because the things you might have done might be still the thing that says, it's me. I have done these things. I am the problem. Yeah. But then what? We go, I'm sorry, God. You didn't wire me this way, and we just go in our heads, that's me. Yeah. But what did you learn about it's not your fault? And before you answer that, I don't know if it was February or January or March. It must have been. Well, when did you close on the house? It was before you closed on the house. It was last fall. It was
in December.
So you and I had a conversation in December or late November.
November time frame, yeah.
And I remember a fascinating just conversation, talking life stuff, right? I'm selling this house, trying to figure out how to navigate it. Should I keep it for a rental? Opportunity is in front of me. There's equity, thinking about cash. And I don't think we connected to talk about a number of things. That was one particular one. But in our conversation of hours, just being real with each other, and why I just love like relationships, is I don't know how it came about, but on the way home, we had been talking about faith and growing in our faith and just doing the things that we don't want to do. And me, it was anger. And so you related to anger. And somehow we went down this path about men and their sin, and maybe it's not anger, maybe it's pornography, maybe it's lust, right? Maybe it's self-centered selfishness, right? And you just opened up to me. You opened up to me about your childhood, 2 particular instances regarding your brother and your current struggles.
Yeah.
And I walked away, and I think you even shared with me some of these things, Josh, or particularly, I don't know what it was, but I haven't really shared publicly or openly with anyone. And I left that day going, Lord, I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I know I'm here for a reason. Because I'm broken too, and I know pain. And I love this guy, and you've called me to be in his life for a reason. Thank you for the opportunity just to speak truth as much as I could. But you shared with me something so profound that leads me to the question of saying it's not your fault. What was not your fault? And what did you have to unpack from your past? What did you have to go back and face as a child in your growing up, in your upbringing, that helps you realize, I see what happened?
For me, it's sexual impurity. It's the lustful brain and pornography. And that's what I shared with you that night. That I was introduced to adult content at a very, very young age. Like 5 years old, probably. If that's my earliest memory. Could be 6. And that it was the men in my life that, or the boys, right? The boys. My brother was a boy. But maybe the men in his life that are introducing us to this. And so I was thinking about it as I was getting prepared to come and share today, but like the idea that God plants seeds, I believe that evil planted a seed in me when I was 5 years old. And over the course of 30 years, it grew into a beanstalk as a direct conduit to the giant that I face in my life. And it's been 3 months now that like I had a God moment, and that was when I like completely surrendered this thing. Like, clearly I can't do this on my own. And it is obvious to me that the introduction to sexual content through, whether it was movies, rated R movies we shouldn't have been watching as a 6-year-old, or softcore porn content on the living room TV when I come out of my bedroom at night and, dad's in the living room, passed out or sleeping on the couch, like seeing that down the hall as I pass to go to the bathroom, or my brother introducing me to masturbation at I was probably 7, 8 years old. Like, come on into the bathroom, buddy, check this out. And just watching that. And he's a boy at this point. Right. And so, like, I spend some time with anger and resentment. And, dude, you want to pause for another God moment that happened just last night? My wife and I go out on an intentional date. My brother-in-law, he's like, we had his daughter over the weekend. He's like, I want to take all your kids. I want you guys to go out. And he's got an amazing story that he's working through process on. But nonetheless, he comes into our life. God brings him to be like, I want your kids. So we go out. Wow. We go out and have a flight of sampler at Spilled Grain Brewery in Annandale. And she hadn't eaten dinner yet. And so let's make our way back towards home to the bar and grill by our house. Typed in our address, and Siri's map took us past the cemetery where my brother is buried.
Oh, wow.
And Sam's like, oh, is this where Adam is? I'm like, yeah. She's like, do you want to stop? I was like, I'll go either way. But sure, why not? And so I backed in and we get out. I hadn't even gotten out. And the 12-year-old boy that attended my brother's funeral at that same exact location 24 years, 23 years prior, he was in me, and everything after him went away. And it was like, dude, I wept, and I didn't know why.
Last night.
What
level of weeping?
Like tears, not like,
not sobbing,
not vocally like weeping, but just like, man, there is pain being released through me right now. And so we walked over, and I sat on his headstone. He's got a headstone that's shaped like a pickup truck that he drove or was driving when he was killed. He was 16 when he was killed. And sat there and just like, God, I don't know what's going on right now. But I'm yours. And whatever you got to tell me, I just sat in silence, and Sam let me be. And I sat there on the bed of the pickup truck with his face engraved on it right next to me. And we sat there for 15 minutes. And I just like, I don't know what you're trying to teach me right now, but you just spoke to me through my wife. And so I'm yours, man.
It's awesome. Just like that.
And what does it mean? I don't know. And what's it for? Something. And I believe that it is.
Yeah.
Right? And so before the pause, I don't know exactly where I was. Oh, but we were talking about my giant, right? Like that seed was planted by an evil in my life a long time ago, and it grew into a direct conduit to the giant. And so 3 months ago, I gave it up, fully surrendered, like, God, I can't do it. And I have not consumed a frame of pornography in 3 months.
It's awesome. Dude.
And the idea, and when like, that's not to say like the whole like lustful idea goes away, but like when that creeps in, now it's like, nope, this isn't mine. This, you did not give this to me. And if that is what got me to the pond that night, then it's all yours, man. Like I can't do it. I'm not going to continue to try.
Yeah.
Because white knuckling this thing any longer, it'll end. I will end it. He, the devil, will end it through me. And then I get back to my kids.
So that's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And
I don't mean to like.
No, it's heavy because
lighten it, but
it's real. And sometimes, and even I even talked about this, that there are parts of our story in our childhood that we remember, and positives, negatives, stuff that's been reconciled, stuff that hasn't been reconciled. We talked about the neighborhood boys, the neighborhood boy who abused me, and I haven't really shared that. And in our conversation, I related to a man sitting next to me that I had never really shared that with anyone except for my wife.
Yeah.
And I think my father helped unpack some of that, and so reconciliation, some of that had happened. So it wasn't as hurting or hurtful or scary or deep as it could have been. But when you look back at your childhood and experiencing that with your brother and his death at a young age that shouldn't have happened, some of the things you saw as a child, the relationship dynamic of your parents and what you learned and the stuff you were able to do, when did you start realizing that all of these things added up together points to just the lack of love and affirmation for what we needed, which is from our Heavenly Father, right? Like we go back and it's just all this shame and guilt that we just keep carrying, like this bag of baloney.
Yeah.
And we think we have to keep carrying it.
Yeah.
Right? So in your processing of counseling and, I want to go unpack this.
Yeah.
What are you learning about just the freedom that comes from expressing that crap, right? Because I think you shared with me even, wow, your counselor saying that's messed up, man.
Yeah.
And even someone saying that to you is affirmation that they're listening and that what you went through was crap.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. In many cases, you were abused and you were in circumstances that God didn't want you in and you didn't put yourself in.
Yeah.
So how healthy is it? How healthy has it been for you to go back to that and start to pull out that crap? Because I think people have this misperception or preconceived notion that the past is the past. Don't uncover it.
Yeah.
But it's the fracture we're trying to find. We're trying to find where it happened. So I think in the Wild at Heart retreat experience, I think this is what we both kind of went back and unpacked. But it makes a lot more sense on the other side. But even on the other side, before doing that experience, what are you learning in counseling that's just everyone should be doing if they have any level of trauma at all?
Yeah.
Like, what's the freeing and liberating experience you had?
Oh, dude. For me, it's like sharing that. The idea that, like, don't dig up the past. Like, that's the past. No, like, that's what's rooted in the angst and the anger and the anxiety and the fear and, like, all of these things that, like, make life a chore. It started there.
It's the beginning of the beanstalk.
Dude. And so the idea that, like, well, we'll just chop the beanstalk off. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a beanstalk, and maybe this isn't even right, but, like, if you cut the beanstalk, what's it do? It sprouts 2. Cut it again. Now you have 4, right? And so, like, most plants, I think, not all plants, but, like, in the idea of, like, you have to unroot that damn thing.
Right.
Or it just starts to grow branches, and next thing you know, like, it's in every part of what you do.
Yeah.
And so it is scary. It is hard. It's uncomfortable. It forces you to, like, go have hard conversations, and the risk is losing relationship. And that's real, man. And that's scary, and that hurts. But the reward is the repair of the same relationship that might be at risk. Right? Like, my marriage was at risk. Still at risk every day if I don't keep fighting for it. And the freedom of telling my wife things and sharing thoughts, right? Like, I'm having these not so awesome thoughts about myself or about our situation or about you. Like, this is what I'm thinking. It feels like a lie in a story. What do you think?
Yeah.
And the transparency to, like, get out of our own head, as hard as that is. And I think it's like, for me and you, it's like, oh, well, I can't share this stuff because, like, it's so gross and it's so wrong and it's so ungodlike that, like, my God friends would never like me. And they couldn't love me if they knew any of this stuff, right?
They would change what they believe of me now.
Yeah.
You can't have that.
And my God friends, it's the complete opposite. Now, my other friends that I've had growing up, like, I've lost plenty of relationship as I've been on this journey. And that's sad to look back on with people that I have had lots of fun, whether it was reckless fun or responsible fun. It's probably probably more reckless than responsible. But there's still fun memories. And I learned things in those reckless times, right? I won't take them for granted because they've shaped my perspective and built the work ethic and the grit and the things that get me to be successfully unsuccessful. But at the same time, it's like, at what cost, I guess, is for me. And maybe that's my career, right? I boil down construction management to be like, I'm a risk manager.
Yeah.
I'm a safety, I'm a quality, I'm a financial, I'm a schedule risk manager. And so what risk am I trying to manage in my personal life by keeping all of this stuff in and not sharing it while I'm risking my own personal well-being with this suicidal ideology? I'm risking relationship with my wife and kids primarily But off the cuff, like, I take those for granted. My wife and kids, like, they're a constant. They're not going anywhere. So I'm afraid of what my parents might think of me, or what my brothers might think of me, or what my friends or colleagues might think of me. And, like, really? Like, that's the risk, is, like, losing friends and losing job and losing status and reputation. But, like, what's the reward?
Right.
Freedom, grace, prosperous marriage, and fathership with my kids.
It's incredible.
So the risk reward here is like, dude, I have been blessed in my life, and it's taken a lot to get to just say that. Like, where I'm at today is a blessing. And that I have a duty and a God-given responsibility as a man, as a husband, and as a father to lead well. And I've never taken that too seriously up until a handful of months ago, where it's like, you know what? I'm starting to unpack the things that make me show up as the person I was and who I do not want to continue to be. And that if someone's going to go into a burning house, I would never expect my wife or kids to go first. And so if this journey is going to be one of trial and tribulation and trudging through the flame, because it is, and it has been, and it's going to continue to be, who else is going to go first? Me. That's the guy who's going first. And if I can do that well and stay spiritual and obedient and put God at the center of it, I'm already seeing the fruit in this short window of time. Because I'm looking for it, right? Like, I am on constant watch for God. Because if I'm not, the enemy is there.
And he knows when you're not looking. I mean...
Yeah, man.
You know what's crazy, dude? It's like... I could have told you, you could have surprised me, you know, if you would have told me any of this 6 years ago. I didn't know you. 2 years ago. Like, what happens and what is so common is that all this stuff, we just keep going on our path. I wouldn't have known the difference between Matt 3 months ago and 6 years ago. Like, you know, and at the same time, I know Matt absolutely within the last 3 months. I know you within the last 6 months, and I absolutely know there's a massive change. So not to say that the change hasn't been unrecognized, but that's because we're intentional and conscientious about these conversations. We have been.
Yeah.
But let's just remove that from a second. You could keep going on either way, and there's hundreds of people, thousands of people that wouldn't have been able to know any different.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I'm not saying that for you. I'm saying that for the thousands and thousands of other people every single day that are facing these demons, and they're doing it on their own.
Yeah.
And everything is inside.
Yeah.
And that everything inside that's eating them away and hurting them is hurting everyone else. And it comes down to this pride and unwillingness to just crack it open because of what we're afraid of might happen. And it's fear. And that is the enemy. At the lowest point of low, the enemy uses shame.
Yeah, 100%.
And so fear is that, you know, afraid, scared of what might happen if. But shame is because of something we've done. It's literally standing, if we were to stand outside of ourselves and just look at the diagram between shame on this end and love on this end and everything else in between, this whole dark half is like, these are thoughts. These are things we've told ourselves. These are lies we've believed from the enemy about ourselves. These are things that have been added up, micro thought after micro thought after compound the crap pile that's there that we put into a bag and keep carrying around, man.
Yeah.
Like, why can't we just take a step? And this is this whole idea of just one step. This nonprofit is, why can't we just take one step forward towards Jesus? Just one. Because fear is keeping us from that. But we can't quantify why fear isn't worth, why it's, the risk is so not worth going into the one step. And what's it really going to cost us? So I want to go on the other side of this quick and fast forward to saying, what relationships are you already seeing transforming? What relationships do you want to see transformed because of your transformation? And I know personally, I'm still working through primarily one from my earliest of childhood, and my father, not because he was a problem, but because I want to go back and understand. Yeah. Right. And I want to grow and have a relationship with him. But before that, it was my mom, and it was a former boss, and it was, people specifically, right? Yeah. And hurts and whatever. And so fortunately it's only a couple, but these relationships, man, how are you feeling moving forward about being vulnerable and as an encouragement to others and being a light, right? And so even in your workplace, right? Have you experienced or seen others that are just, and you recognize that in them, I am so sick of work. I'm so sick of life. It's a chore. And then you say, you know what, man? Whatever positive thing comes to your mind. Yeah. Like, isn't that the light in the darkness?
100%.
Right? So I think getting out of this back story and moving into the future. Yeah. Healing and reconciliation and the liberation and the freedom that comes from it. Yeah. What's that been like? I mean, in your wife, let's just dive in there. Yeah. Like, what have you seen as a difference? What has she seen as a difference in Matt?
Yeah. In my marriage, the journey we're on is that as I am sharing my brokenness and uncovering my story, she's starting to do the same. Wow. And that she has her own story, and that we both bring in our own brokenness into this marriage, and that neither one of us are the problem. And that has been so freeing that, like,
we do this.
Yeah. Like, I talk to my kids, right? Kids are fighting, right? And the first thing they say is one of their other siblings' names, right? Well, Ezra, I'm like, well, hold on. Okay, time out. Let's start with I, which I've learned through a lot of training, both professional and some counseling, but like, let's start with I. Like, where am I accountable in this, right? And so that's been super helpful for us to, like, as I trudge through the fire, she's coming on board. She's recognizing that, oh, wait, there is some brokenness here that makes her show up as the way she is. And so baby steps, right? We're making progress daily, hourly, minutely sometimes, right? So that's super encouraging, just to, like, start to see the fruit. Now, that's not going to be for everybody. And, I told my wife early on in this 3-month journey that, like she is an angel sent from God to save me. And whether she believes that or I believe that, I do. And it's woven into our story that we don't have time to get into in the next half hour. But I'd love to share that a little bit more if the opportunity came, because she has been, and she is the catalyst driving our family towards God. I'm an early adapter on the bell curve, and so I'm all in, usually, in most things. So that's the relationship with my wife, in process, in repair, daily. The other one that I've seen is with my oldest son, Liam, who is my stepson. But Liam has been my son since he was 1.5 years. And like I shared, like, I've wanted to be his dad. And I've only recently come to realize, like, he has a dad. He doesn't need that from me. Right. He needs something else from me. Right. And so I've spent a lot of time showing up like the monster and the model that was given to me that I don't want to continue. And so repair with Liam has been the most transformational thing. Like, when the monster happens, call him out and acknowledging him, own my role in it, apologize to Liam. And kids are so resilient in the way that, like, he's like, oh, it's okay. Yeah. And I'm like, no, bud.
Just bounce off.
Buddy, let's, I want to sit in this for a moment, because I want you to hear that, like, it wasn't okay for me to behave that way, for me to treat you that way. And I am so so sorry. And then, so while that heart retreat, after I think it was a sonship session, I wrote letters to all my kids. And it wasn't until probably 2 weeks after I asked Liam to read it, if he wanted to read it. And he started to read it. And I wrote so fast that the words weren't clear. And some of the way of which I wrote the letter is not at his reading level.
Okay.
And so I'm like, okay, let me read it.
Okay.
And so I read this letter that I wrote to Liam out loud in the kitchen. And at the end of it, he like this light came out of him. And he was like, thank you so much for that. Like, I feel so good after hearing that. And it was all in the perspective of like, dude, I've been trying to be something you're not. And there's an evil in me that comes out on you. And I am so sorry for all that, buddy. And I don't need to be your dad. I'm your brother in Christ. And I'm here as a father figure in the home. Because there's still,
mom and
there's
you live
still
here.
that boundary and
Yep.
that like structure of family in place. But like, buddy, I am so sorry for how I've shown up and how I might still stumble. And every time I do, I go back to him, and it's the repair. It's the humility of like, when we started talking to have this conversation, I was like, I don't think I'm ready because I'm not redeemed, right? And so it's like, when are you redeemed?
I think you even said that on the way home, maybe.
I did, yeah. And it's like, if it's taken 35 years to get to this point, and I spend another 35 years to get to the next point, or some of it is maybe financial like achievement, right? So if $1 million is my number, then I'm ready to share my story.
Right.
Like, if I run the numbers and I don't do anything different, that's another 40 years. Like, who in the world doesn't get to hear the story for the next 40 years?
Yeah, right.
How selfish is that, right? And so that's how I'm seeing it in my relationship with, to get back to Liam, is like the repair and the humility and just like calling it out what it is and joining him in like, yeah, dude, I disciplined you really hard. And so I'm sorry. I take some of those things back because I didn't mean them. That was coming from a place of anger and hatred, and you don't deserve that. You are a boy. You're a boy. And the things you're doing are written into your genetic code that God gave you, right? And so who am I to take that from you?
And when I respond the way I do, it seems like it's you.
Yeah.
Right? But it's me.
It's me.
And it's like, oh gosh, just to even acknowledge that, right? It's taken so much. I feel like, it's the classic, the kids are the perfect example of pointing out, first thing is, my kids point out and say the name, like you're saying. Yeah. It was Olive's fault. It was Uriah's fault. Whatever. Yeah. Right. And it's easy to do. But the Bible, Scripture talks about pointing out the speck, the tiny little thing, right? When we have the plank in our own eye, a big old log.
Yep.
And it's like, how could we miss that log? We're walking around with it, yet we feel entitled to point out all the things. And I think the power of pointing out that log is strength. It's humility. It's vulnerability. Yeah. And I think vulnerability is strength. And when you, especially as an adult, can get on your knees, get low and get slow and look one-on-one with your child and own what you've done. Yeah. Like, I would attest to you 10 times and stamp on it that is game-changing. Like, but here's the reality. That's really easy to say, really hard to do, to own your crap. Like, I used to get mad at my kids. Well, particularly one, for his anxiety and fear and difficulty and you name it, X, Y, or Z. Yeah. I would get angry because it was me going, why can't you just do it? Why can't you just be like everyone else? Why? Yeah. And all those questions come back to, I don't have time to sit here and be with you and understand you and have empathy and relate to you. What a freaking jerk. Like, right? Your own flesh and blood. And it's like, wow. When I realize that happens, now when he starts going down that path, I stand up on a chair. I did this recently when my son this is my other son now, was all hard on himself. And so rather than, just being really annoyed because how crazy he was acting, I stood on a chair and I said, dude, let me tell you, I wasn't born bald. I had, best hair in high school. Do you think I wanted to be bald? Do you think I wanted hair coming out of every square inch of my body or have a unibrow? Do you think I wanted to struggle with athlete's foot or being short or dealing with anger? Like, I stand up and I try to own every freaking insecurity that I have.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, my dad is not superhuman.
Yeah.
He's real. Let's talk, Dad.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, doors wide open.
Yeah.
Right? And so how powerful, man, for you to share that with Liam and even that letter.
Yeah.
And side nugget before I forget, go reread those to yourselves in an audio file, or I have an audio transcript, or either one. And then you have them, and then you could format them by uploading the ChatGPT.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And then you got a nice version that's readable, and then you could also do a summary, or a short version of it, and hand it out. Or anyway, I took all my notes from Wild at Heart.
Yeah.
Very hard to read doctor handwriting.
Yeah.
Pages and pages. And I opened up my notepad app and I just started dictating or talking.
Yeah.
And it was transcribing, and those are all my notes. And so now
nice.
I'm like, okay, that's at least a start, because I would not be able to go back and reference the chicken scratches. But dude, so in the thick of life, in the uncertainty, in the relationship repair, in the dynamics of you did something wrong, like great. We had this revelation, we come back pumped up and on fire.
Yeah.
But how does sin still show up, and how is Matt, and I know how Matt is, but how would Matt explain what he's doing to put on the full armor of God? And really, that's it. We're going to battle, dude. Like, we forget this. That's part of the equipping. Like the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, and the shield of faith, and the shoes of peace. This is war. Yeah. And as we learned in watching some great flicks, that men that lose everything in Braveheart and Gladiator, and even if they hadn't lost everything, their countrymen are there to represent. We are willing to fight for it all because the war's coming to us, and if we don't, we lose it all.
Yeah.
It's 2024, and it doesn't seem like we have those threats. We don't have those threats, but we have thousands of other spiritual threats and cultural threats now, right? That's the all-in that translation isn't happening with. This is that translation. What is Matt doing right now? Get up in the morning, and what are you doing to put on that full armor?
Well, I start my day with the daily prayer.
Amen.
From the Wild at Heart.
Do you still read it, or do you audio?
I read it.
How long does it take you now?
It's probably 7 minutes.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Sometimes. Depends if I'm sitting up or laying down. If I lay down, it might... Whoa, let's get back to God here.
Not
let's
off.
Like connect.
What's a 13 and a half minute prayer at John Eldridge's 1X?
Yeah.
So I do it at 175 still, because I don't like to read.
My gosh, I tried that. I can't, like, my brain can't even keep up to like how fast he's going. So.
Well, you must read that fast because it takes you 7 minutes.
Yeah, well, you can read, like, I don't know how many times faster than you can listen.
That's true.
Like,
that's probably
some
formula
study
math.
on that. I don't know. Somebody way smarter than me knows that. But you can read way faster than you can listen.
So that prayer, what is that prayer?
Oh man, the prayer just sets the day of, like, that's a prayer of surrender. It's a prayer of, like, accepting God into everything that we're gonna encounter in that day. It's a prayer that acknowledges the brokenness and the enemy in the world, but again invites God in the work that Jesus did for us, and to cover us with the blood that he shed and the salvation that he offers. It sets us up for the interactions with people around us. Like, may only God come in between us, right? And so it helps lay down that fence that gets built up. It helps posture my day so that I need to be reminded every day that that I am like God is the hero of this story. I think it's said in the prayer that like, God, you're the hero of this story. I am grateful to be a part of it. And so there's this idea of surrender. There's this idea of protection. There's this idea of renunciation. And then praying for others, right? In the people you come in interaction with, your household, your business. Those sorts of things are in the prayer. And then putting on the armor to go to battle is how that prayer wraps up. And, well, second to last, right? So the second to last is getting dressed in the armor of the faith. Mm-hmm. And lastly, invites God again and the angels to go forth ahead of you and to clear a way. Mm-hmm. And whether that's right away in the morning or partway through the day, like I try not to miss that thing, and I've only missed it a couple times. But the earlier in the day I read it, it sets me off in the right direction. I've taken it to the next step and downloaded the Pause app through the Wild at Heart podcast. And so I have a reminder at 10:45 in the morning and at like 2:45 in the afternoon, just a quick minute. And John prays. It's an audio prayer. There's a 1, 3, 5, or 10-minute option depending on how you're feeling. But like 1 minute, I will pause and like no matter what I'm doing. Now, if I'm in the middle of a meeting, that's a little bit different. But when I get back in the car, it's like, okay, time to pause. And like, I need him. I need him all day long, man. And without him, I will become that monster again. Or that monster that's in me will be bred. The beanstalk will be cut and he will sprout, you know? And so I don't know, man, like complete surrender and having been the broken man who attended church, and we haven't gotten into like substance abuse and addiction and those sorts of things, but like, man, what do we got? I was introduced to marijuana at a very young age, 12 years old, the summer before. I spent a lot of time with my brother, and then that October he was killed. And that fractured our family. To this day.
How old were you? You were 12.
I was 12.
Yeah, as you mentioned.
That event fractured our family, but not only the sexual impurity, but then the substance started. And man, even for the first few years of going to church, like it was a wake and bake to like calm the monster inside and, you know, like go to church stoned, right? And still engage in the Holy Spirit. And it's been now 2 weeks that like the stash was running down, and I told my wife, like, I'm not going to go buy a bag from a friend of mine that I know I could call up right now and go get some. And like, I threw all my paraphernalia away 3 weeks ago now. I think it was the Thursday before the retreat, or maybe it was the Thursday when I got home. I don't know, but like, I'd been hanging on to that stuff since college, and like, first it was the impurity and the porn that I invited God into, and then it was this addiction or reliance on THC. And not to say that that's not a bad thing, that it doesn't work for people at a medicated level, but for me, that was a part of the giant. Like, it was an appendage of the body of the giant. And so am I working through that, and what the consequences of like, now how do I medicate, right? Because now I don't have that. I'm learning that, but bring God into it, and I have to, man, and that's the only place where I'm finding, like, okay, I'm not the problem. These things that happen, I can work through them. It will be hard. I'm okay with that. I've got to go through the fire. The reward is all of these other things we've talked about, and so what's there to lose except my life? And if that, the consequence for my wife and kids and other people around me, like, dude, there's a design here. God planted me on this earth for a reason. I have the story I have because he's doing something with it. And when I share the story, it comes off the cuff like, what's the big deal, man? Like, right. I'm not searching for validation in like going through multiple divorces as a kid and dealing with sexual things as a kid and substance abuse as a kid,
losing your brother and
death
whatever.
As a kid, and like those things are like, that's just my story, man.
Right. But you have to realize in that, right, it's formed you, and realizing why we need a savior.
Yeah.
You know?
But I would also acknowledge that, like, it's made me, it's instilled this, like, work ethic in this grit, in this perseverance to be, you know, from a career perspective, right? Like, I've gotten to a point in my career that, like, a lot of my peers, I was excelling ahead of my peers a lot through my career and getting to the successful, like, earthly success, if you will, which, if you ask me, like, still haven't made it, still working that. Like, my goals are I achieve here, and then you just move the needle, right? You just constantly move the needle. And so I think it's important to acknowledge, like, my story did instill character to get me to a point of earthly success. And it's also moved me into this totally new realm of life of what I would call, like, spiritual success or relational success. And I will acknowledge, like, when do you make it? I think you'll just continue to move the needle, right? When I repair the one relationship I'm working on in my first circle, then it goes out to repairing relationship and brokenness with my parents, and then it's with my siblings, and then it's with coworkers or people that I've hurt in my past. And so I don't think, will I ever make it, right? Financial success, I'll keep moving the needle. Spiritual and relationship success, I'm going to keep moving the needle. But what's wrong with that? That's growth, man.
Progress over perfection.
Life. And I'm happy to invite God into it, to be a part of it, to be the captain of my ship, if you will.
Yeah, man.
And, like, he's the hero.
Well, a couple things come to mind there. I mean, if we're not moving forward, we're moving backwards.
Yeah.
Right? And if we sit stagnant, and anything will get eaten alive.
Yeah.
And good is the enemy of great. You know, we sometimes settle for good when God has something far greater for us. And intentionality and purpose is sort of the realization on the other end of this now that, okay, you know, I've gone through these trenches. Now I understand what crap or bad or worse or past looks like. Now, how do I live with purpose and being intentional in that way to allow myself to raise the bar in my faith, you know, in my physical wellness, in my mental and spiritual well-being, and to be the person God made me to be, because I could not show up that way before, right? And so when we get to the end, the success, you know, I talk about, well done, good and faithful servant. And that means, yes, acknowledging our sin, but we can't live in it. And that means when we don't achieve what we want, that's I mean, God, if you delight in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. This is in Psalm. Well, does that mean he's going to give you the desires of anything? Well, it says first, if you delight in him. What does delighting in him mean? Well, it means to take pride, to take understanding and knowing that he is our God and that there's a will that he has for us. And so when we take pride in that, he knows your heart is aligning with his. And so when you align his heart, of course he's going to give you the desires of your heart because it's in line with his. Love God, love others, make disciples. Yeah. But then when the Holy Spirit is truly living in us, we unpack this because we get freedom in Christ, which when he's in us, it comes out as a byproduct. Who doesn't want love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control? Who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We have that. What doesn't mean you're not going to fail. Yeah. But we get back up now. There's 100%. A reason to get back up. Yeah. You know, we're not done. If he's not done, what's the song? If I'm not dead, he's not done.
Something like that.
Yeah. You know, and true. It's so true that I would rather lose this life to save eternity than to save this life, right, and lose eternity.
100%.
This is what we all face every day. Like, oh, I get to do what I want to do in my flesh. Oh, that means I get to check out that video. Oh, and just 2 seconds on Instagram, I'm seeing things I shouldn't be seeing and spending too many 2 seconds going, and I go, oh, now I know why I shut it off. And it's like, well, is that the answer? Is that the answer? If that's my struggle, that's the answer, right? So like anyone, it's the posture and the intentionality, the posture of our heart, the intentionality in it to find that purpose and meaning in it. So last thing, financial success. Like, I think we've had lots of conversations about this, but it's that one thing that's very easy to quantify. And it's that one thing to feel like surrender is a word that just is almost impossible to get to, right? Because it's almost like we have to show up to make money. And if we don't show up, that means it's on us, right? Because if we don't show up, well, then we lose the spirit of all of it that he gave us, the ability to work. It's all his anyway. So now, if we delight in him, he'll give us the desires of our heart if we are delighting in his will to serve him. And this is where exponential wealth has come out of nowhere. Like for me to stop and say, don't chase wealth to be wealthy, to call it providing for your family when you screwed up big time. It's get that figured out, make your family first, and he promises that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. That's plenty. But beyond that, now I'm like, I want to use my story. I want to use my gifts. And if millions of people can prosper from that, now it's really fun. And if that's me too, cool. But that's the posture that I had to get to. And I, I'm not perfect, and I still have a desire to build a bigger whatever. But it's different. It's not the drive of the money for the things that I want. It's for the impact. So anyway, man, we went up and down and back and forth and inside out, and we covered a lot of ground. Amazing, and so grateful for you sharing the story. What would you encourage others? What would you share with others that maybe relate to some struggle? Maybe relate to, I like this Matt guy because he's being real and no sugarcoating. Or even someone from the past that might have known you who you used to be. What do you say? What do you say to say, yeah, that was that guy, and he's still Matt Eklund, but what do you want them to know about what you found?
We hear a lot that God offers a peace that passes all understanding, right? And I surrender that idea to say that, like, I don't know that I can explain it to anybody. Somebody has to experience it. But to get to that place is to overcome the fear, to confront the humility and the shame, and be ready for the enemy that works through those coming back at you, right? Because there's been a number of people that I've shared things with, and they're like, you're weird and wrong and get away from me. And it's like, oh, that was a risk I took, and that hurts to lose that person. But there have been, God has not replaced those people, but God has put other people in my life, and will put people in anyone else's life as you work through hanging on to the things that you take to your grave. Start sharing those with people, and take the risk, and acknowledge, like, this is gonna hurt. You could leave a scar, but scars are great stories to be shared, I think. And so, like, there's a surrender to our Creator in it. There's faith, then like faith. I've wrestled with that for a long time. And even still get in the own psychology of, like, what is faith, right? But, like, at the end of it, like, I have to have faith. And that, like, as I continue to look for God, and I look at my story, and I find him working all the time, everywhere, through relationships, through my wife, through my kids, my wife last night, like I shared, my kids on a daily basis, like, look for God. And the more you practice looking for him, you will see him.
Mm-hmm.
He is working. And the place to start is in the rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken that for me. I've spent years meditating on where was God. And it's taken a lot of time and deliberate thought and a lot of just like twisting things and untwisting things within my own mind. Seeking professional help has been great. Small group, leaning on men, building a relationship, find someone that I can trust to share my story, who has my heart in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's these little nuggets that over time build an army that fight for your soul, and God fights through them on your behalf. And so you have to take that just one step to just like surrender. Like, it's going to be hard and it's scary and it's going to hurt, but God's got your back. And if we just trust him fully, even when it doesn't feel like he's there, like the fruit is there, man. And it's on his time, and it may not feel like, it's not like taking a hit off the pipe, right? I can feel it now.
Right.
Like there's some growth to like I got to sit in it, God, and thanks for it, I guess.
Yeah, man.
But that's the advice, man. So you would just have to like, you got to jump in, and you got to just like find surrender and be ready for it when it comes, because it's coming.
It will come. Yeah. And it's like you get a new car, you get something new, you start seeing all of them all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the message translates well to, hey, recognize and acknowledge God and look for him, and you'll find him. Right. And I was just thinking of that song, great song. It's Brandon Lake and someone else. There's Honey in the Rock.
Yeah.
And it's like they're talking about being in the desert and, having all we need. He is all we need.
Yeah.
And that the rock, literally in the desert, finding honey, finding just enough in him to be satisfied. And yet we're just so inundated with stuff and things that we keep thinking this is the stuff that satisfies, right? Look around to whatever. And no, that's powerful, man. Looking for him, finding him, seeking him, and you will find him. And so cool. I love when we get raw. It doesn't always happen. So I think a couple times I had some things brewing up here.
I appreciate the compassion, brother.
Yeah, dude.
I love it.
So thanks for sharing. The inspiration of the story has been magnificent. For those that haven't subscribed to the channel, check it out on YouTube and hit subscribe. Actually, it's the first time I've ever said that. Please
nice.
Subscribe. We'll check you next time on the Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. I'm your host, Josh Dietrich. Talk to you soon.